Welcome to the Googlers in Climate Founder Series, where we explore how former and current Googlers and their friends are reshaping our world through climate tech. I'm your host, Veronique Lafargue, founder and marketing advisor to climate tech startups. Today, my guest is Mark Grozen-Smith, founder and CEO of Thresh Power. Born in Hawaii and now based in San Francisco, Mark channels his energy in hundreds of projects, from triathlons, surfing and kitesurfing, to snow sports, music and community building. But first of all, Thresh. Mark's professional journey includes engineering and product management roles for big tech and startups. At Google, he worked on impactful projects across AR, maps, and messages. Today, Mark leads Thresh, a platform that makes an AI diligence agent to help streamline the acquisition of renewable energy projects. Mark, welcome to the show. And we're going to talk more about what Thresh is. Before that, we wanted to show a few screenshots so people can understand the product. Do you mind walking us through what we're seeing here on the screen?
When you're building large-scale energy projects, and that means a solar farm, wind farm, anything like that, grid-scale battery, when you're building that stuff, a lot of the time you'll have one type of team, one company that is talking to farmers or talking to people who have land and finding that land, getting a lease on it, getting the ability and contract to be able to build, again, like a solar farm, something like that. The general term is energy project, so I'll probably say that a lot in this call. So you'll get the ability and legal allowance to create some sort of an energy project on this land. And then maybe that team doesn't really want to spend a lot of money. They don't want to have long project times. They just want to build relationships with these types of people and then kind of flip the project in a sense. And so they'll get that allowance, maybe get a permit or apply for something, and then sell that to a later stage team that is going to be developing the rest of this project. And then that team will talk to the grid and the utility and connect to that, or apply to connect to that, called interconnection. They'll do a bunch of engineering analysis. They'll get other permits. Eventually, they'll get financing from a bank and bring in, maybe $20 million of their own, and then $80 million from the bank, and then all of that. Actually build out the full project. So there are different teams. The point is there are different teams that are doing these different stages of building out these energy projects, which means that team one needs to sell the project to team two. And so team two has to look at this project. They've never seen it before. They probably often will know the person or that developer, but they'll say, okay, well, I want to buy this thing. It's going to cost me $5 million. But before I buy it, I want to make super sure that I'm actually going to be able to build this solar farm here, or this energy project. And I want to make sure it's also going to make me money. And so if I'm evaluating that, I'm talking to this earlier stage developer and I'm trying to understand, will I be able to build this and will it make me money? I'm going to need to look at what are all the permits that are here? What are the leases that are here? Are we allowed to use this land? Are there any risks involved with this? A really great example of a risk would be the early stage developer got 7 different leases, and one of those leases actually doesn't allow you to use this land for substantial construction or something. You're only allowed to use it for agriculture. That would be a crazy example, but you might see these leases and say, oh, great, we have all the land we need. But one of the biggest leases says you actually can't build on this land. You can only use it for agriculture. So that would be a really big problem. You want to make sure you're ahead of that. You want to make sure you know what's going on this land, on this project, before you acquire it and then try to build this out. That is complex. You need to know a lot of different things. That is hard, but you probably don't really have an idea of how hard that really is. Often that's going to be, you get this project, you have maybe 2, 3, up to, I was going to say up to 500 or 600 documents in the data room, the set of data that they give you. But we saw a project that was 1,500 documents a month ago or so. And that's going to be just extremely overwhelming, especially because the seller wants to sell this as soon as they can. And there are a lot of buyers. So they'll often say, hey, let us know your bid within about a week, maybe 2. And we'll be moving on forward in the process from there. So now if someone just came to you and said, here are 400 documents. You've got a week to read all of them and understand everything and decide if you want to put down $30 million to buy this thing or not. Absolutely crazy, extremely stressful and overwhelming. And what you're looking for, I described like a lease situation, and you don't, I mean, leases are an incredibly important piece of this. Anything related to real estate and what's called title and stuff like that. But then there's everything in the engineering space. There's everything in the permitting and environmental. There's everything related to the interconnection and applying to the grid and the utility to connect to it. So it's just there's a lot of information that you need to go through, and often the seller just gives you the data room. Again, that's just like all the documents you get there. Um, they'll give you the data room, and it's super messy, just kind of like clearly just like a ad hoc process. They haven't fully organized it. Sometimes they will. Often they will organize it. To be clear, I want to give them credit where they deserve it, but sometimes they won't. And so you'll have these things that have weird file names. They'll have kind of no organizational structure or some organizational structure that doesn't really make sense. We saw one where all of the main files were actually within the folder called archive, which you wouldn't expect it. All the real things were in the archive. And so, yeah, basically the point is you have a crazy needle in a haystack situation, and you need to find all of this information from that haystack. You basically have a lot of needles to find in this haystack. So that's the context. That's kind of like the problem. If this is how this works, and you kind of really are limited to the capabilities that even the smartest and most hardworking humans have, then you're basically going to be able to look at one project per week or so. I mean, it depends on exactly the process, but let's just keep it simple. You'll be able to look at one project in a week. So your team is building, large scale wind or something, and you're only able to evaluate one project a week when there are dozens or hundreds of projects out there. And so then you're limited by your time and limited by your ability to do this diligence. And so your business is only going to look at a handful of projects, decide on which one to buy out of those small handfuls, that small handful, and then hopefully you chose right. But the problem is 60% of the time you acquire a project and that project actually doesn't get built out. Something pops up, maybe the property taxes are really substantially higher than you expected because the land was initially agriculture, now it's for solar, whatever, lots of different things. And so that's the challenge and the business impact. I can now explain what we have on the screen, but did that all make sense? Did I move too fast?
No, I think you made it super clear the importance of due diligence, both on the business side, execution, and
Cool.
city. So thank you for explaining that to everybody.
Okay, so now I think we generally have an idea of what's going on, and I can explain what's on the screen. So we've got three screenshots. The first one is an example of a data room. So imagine you get this data room, and there are no folders. There's just, we're displaying about 30 files, but again, imagine there are several hundred. The files are titled things like permit rec 0987. Okay, probably something related to permits. Survey plot 3892X. Some sort of a land plot survey. Hard to say. Maybe we've seen something like that before, but another file called L322TK. I can't imagine how you'd guess what that is. So the point is, like, you have a few hours today to try to figure out, do we want to even dive deeper into this project? And this is the mess that you're given. You need to find, like, do we even have all the leases that we need here? What are the endangered species that live on this land, et cetera? And the beginning of this is just overwhelmingly messy and difficult. And so rather than what you do today, I mean, what people do today is they basically open up each of these, they'll skim through it quickly and try to find this information. And that'll take just a hell of a long time. Rather than that, using Thresh, they're able to, and now we're on the second screenshot here, you're able to drop all the files into Thresh, create a new project, and Thresh will automatically organize these files into the right folders. We'll rename all the files. I don't have that in the screenshot, but we'll rename all the files. And then pull out a bunch of other things, but I'll explain that in a sec. So what you can see on the screenshot, you can see these different folders. There's corporate, engineering, procurement, and construction, environmental and site studies, interconnection, several of them. And we automatically put all the files into those right folders. And then there's another layer of folders inside of there to have more granularity. But you can see they're probably too small to really read, but there are numbers on the side that say there are 17 files in corporate, 83 files in the engineering folder, 44 in environmental, etc. And so like just from this screenshot, hopefully you can see it's a lot less overwhelming to get started. Like if you get all these files, drag them into Thresh, and then you want to evaluate, okay, before I look at anything else, like do we actually even have the land that we need? You can dive straight into those files and ignore everything else. And you don't have this crazy mess that's overwhelming. It's relatively simple, but it's a lot of time that you're going to be able to save just from there. But then, and then again, we rename the files. So you're not looking at L322tk.pdf. You're looking at, lease tract 12, 2024 or something like that, Now, the last screenshot, I'm showing you what we call the report. So in the report, it's really pulling out all the questions that you have, that you're always going to have for every project, rather than you needing to look through all the files and find this information one by one, which is the same info you're going to need every time. You're always going to be looking for certain questions around, the endangered species that live on this land and where this land is located and capacity of the project design, et cetera. That report pulls all that information out and gives you a summary of this is the answer to that type of a question, and then here's the source for where you could find that information if you want to dive deeper into the original files.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to stop sharing for now and rewind a little, because this is a big different step from being a PM at Google, I can imagine. And from the personal projects you shared with us previously, we know you're someone who just embrace something new and create from scratch. But can you walk us through the journey to becoming the founder of Thresh? What went through your mind, and how did you make the leap?
Yeah, so there are a couple different things there, internal and external motivations for it. But yeah, so I was working at Google for a few years, and I left and went to a startup, and then came back actually. And it was great, learned a lot of great things, a lot of great people and stuff. But I realized I didn't want to become anybody that I reported to. I had a couple of great managers and stuff like that, but that wasn't the life that I wanted to live, and they weren't really the skills that I wanted to build. So I felt like I was kind of climbing up the wrong ladder already. But then also, the world is kind of burning. And I mean, I grew up in Hawaii. Like I've seen the ocean and the coral reefs and everything change. We all have read the news once or twice, and every time you read the news, there are more terrifying things going on there, related to climate. And so, I mean, I couldn't really sleep well knowing that like I was working on something that didn't really feel like it mattered that much, and all of this was going on. So the biggest external piece was definitely that. It was just, um, you know, I needed to do something in climate. And then internally, I guess kind of related to what I said before, just like the type of person I wanted to be, the skills I wanted to build, the challenges I wanted to have, um, they weren't really going to be in kind of the challenging but safeguarded scenario of working at somewhere like Google. I wanted it to be like, um, it always feels like kind of like setting sail and like where are you going to sail in the world? And I saw several of my friends who started companies just going out and getting in all these crazy storms, and like you look at them, you're like, wow, they're definitely not going to make it through that. And then 2 days later, they're doing great. And I've had a couple friends who have had some crazy hard things go on in their lives, and they handle it so much better than they probably would have if they didn't have the chaos that ensues from starting a company.
Wow, very cool. Yeah, the resilience aspect, I guess it's the everyday thing when you start your own company. And quite a few of us have also started ours and are knowing the up and down. Um, but also, can I ask, how did you decide on that specific problem to solve? Were you already exposed to that? Was there any meeting that really influenced you?
Yeah, totally. So the way I went about it, I mean, I hadn't worked in renewable energy for 5 years of my life or something like that to inform this before. But the way I did it, I mean, I really like being super immersive. I moved to Berlin for 6 months to learn German, and that worked pretty well. And so similar type of approach. I went to conferences. I hit every person I've ever met up on like do you know anybody who works in energy? How can I learn more from them? I was probably pretty annoying to a couple of people, but thank you for your time to those people. And I also got a like job as a developer to work at one of these companies to see what the job was like and learn what everything was going on. It was a lot of painful coordination work to get a lot of this stuff done. It's technically challenging for sure, but I think the biggest challenge of all this is a lot of the coordination work, which is really kind of where the thought of Thresh comes from. It's like in order to get to the world that we need to be in with the amount of energy that we need and how much it needs to be renewable, we're gonna really need that to be a lot of we're gonna need to build out a lot of solar, wind, and battery. And especially with all the data science growth and data center growth and everything, we're going to need that to grow quickly. And the non-physical things, like the non-hardware components and stuff, we call them the soft costs, are a huge component of building out these energy projects. And so that's kind of what was on my mind. How can I help renewable energy developers do that? And I talked to this one guy, and he said he was a really smart guy, honestly, like basically is doing like Wall Street types of finance work. And he said, I spend 5 to 10 hours a week organizing documents and putting them in the right folders. And I was just like, wait, what? Why are you doing that? That seems like a terrible use of your time. And I mean, he's a smart guy, really great guy. We're still friends. And yeah, so I started out thinking we need to fix that. And didn't really think that was a company on its own, but then once I pulled on the thread for it, I was like, hey, why are you organizing this? What else could we help you do along that process? I discovered, oh, this whole diligence thing is actually really challenging and takes a lot of time there.
I want to highlight, I love the immersive aspect of your approach, like get in, get a job, learn from the inside. I think for people who are still a little afraid of jumping in, that can be also a very nice transition. Pick a space you're passionate about, find a job, and then from there, you have enough insights on the industry to start your own thing. So very, very cool. And we know building a company, it's not usually just a one-person job. I want to talk about the blurb. So finding a co-founder is usually pretty difficult. We talk about analogy with dating, and there's a lot of advice out there. But I want to hear from your own story and how you created the blurb to find the ideal co-founder.
Yeah, so for finding a co-founder, I mean, if anybody's looking to start a company, great idea to find somebody that you've worked with for a while that you have good working chemistry with and alignment on X and Y. I didn't really have that. I didn't have a person I had in mind and was ready to start a company or anything. So I went to this one conference and I found this guy. We're both interested in the same stuff. And we worked together for a couple of months. But then we just kind of realized we weren't really trying to work on the same type of company. We didn't have the same perspective on it, and we didn't really have complementary skills. And so we're like, okay, we need to figure out how to make this work. And ultimately, we kind of couldn't. So we broke up, to use the dating terms there. But then I was like, okay, well, the number one thing on my mind now is how do I get the right co-founder? Starting a company solo is totally possible, but that's a lot and hard, and I didn't want to do that for my first company. I took a very intentional approach to it. I wanted to ask my top 30 friends who might know somebody who'd be a good fit for who they'd be thinking. And when I was going to reach out to them, I was like, well, I should give them something structured to, not just like, hey, do you know anybody generally? I should say like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm trying to do. And the other person is going to want to vet me as well. So like, okay, here's who I am and what I've done and stuff like that. So, so I wrote this, what she's calling the blurb. And well, I guess it's titled Co-founder Search Blurb. So I guess I titled the blurb. But I have this document that is, this is who I am. This is the type of company I'm trying to start, and the mission that I care about. This is who I'm looking for, and kind of the role that I want myself to play and them to play. And just having that really clear communication was super, super helpful because my friends were able to find somebody who would fit that well. Somebody who sees that would be able to say, oh, that's perfect. That is me. And somebody who isn't that person would be able to read that and say, oh, that's not going to be me. So I had a couple people who, I met them through the YC co-founder matching platform. Great platform, honestly. I would recommend it. But I did have people who were like, cool, okay, so I see that you're looking for a CTO in a climate company. I see that you used to be an engineer, and so I was wondering if you want to write code for this fintech idea I have. I was like, why would I want to do that? That's the opposite of what I said I'm trying to do on both accounts. So it was really good to be super clear. And through a complicated web of connections, I found my co-founder, and it's been absolutely amazing for the past year.
I love that. And ask Mark if he was willing to share the blurb. So if anybody needs one, we can also share that after the call. How did you decide the roles and responsibility between you and your co-founder once you found the perfect match?
Yeah, before meeting and discussing any of it, I basically just I knew what I wanted to do and the types of problems I wanted to build or to like work through. Um, I love engineering and I really love knowing about it and engaging in it. I love engineering. Like I love kind of like going for a swim. It's super fun to be in the water and that matters a lot to me. But also I would like to continue living on land and I don't want to like spend 4 days stuck on one bug again. So that's kind of like why I left engineering. And so I didn't want to do that. Um, I was happy to be involved in writing code, if that made sense for what we're building. But I didn't want to be the main one responsible for the engineering. And so that was a big piece. I was like, hey, I want somebody who wants to really be the CTO and own all of that. And I wanted to be focused on building relationships, understanding, the people in the space. And so then when we got together and started really talking it through, um, yeah, honestly, we aligned so well. We never even really had to like, oh, like I kind of want to do this, but I can let you do like we didn't have to really do any compromises. We've just been like really perfectly aligned the whole way along.
That's awesome. I want to say another piece of the puzzle usually when you start a company is funding. And first of all, congratulations on closing your first seed round, I think just before the holidays. But I know you mentioned to me how meeting investors has also been teaching you a lot about what kind of investors you want to bring on board. Can you talk us a little bit through that process and the signals you picked up from the process?
Fundraising was definitely everything people made it out to be. If you've ever talked to a founder about fundraising, unless you're talking to my friend Max, you're probably hearing that it's terrible. And it was definitely hard. There are definitely a lot of like ups and downs. And it's pretty much never going to be easy. You should absolutely never expect it to be easy. But there are definitely some mistakes that I made along the way that I am glad I learned and improved on. Um, I think a couple of the biggest things I learned, one, you should pretty much always expect if you're going to be raising money, it's going to take the same amount of time. So initially we were targeting like 300K or so. And that was just going to be like, yeah, we don't really want to hire anything yet. So like, let's just get enough money to pay for the conferences and data center costs and stuff like that we have, and be safe through spring. And then in spring we can raise then. And that was a bad idea because 300K is basically going to be as hard as 1.5 million. And so we spent a little bit of time, and we spent a couple of months doing that and realized like we're gonna have to get like 30 $10,000 checks, which is gonna be really hard, as opposed to two 800K checks. And so after working on it for a while, we realized like, actually we could probably do better using the time. If like we're not going to save any time if we go about this approach, we're going to spend a lot of time, which is a really bad way to think about starting a company. And so yeah, we just decided let's pivot to actually raising a proper round, and that was way more effective. Learning how to read like what people are thinking and saying. You get a lot of people who are saying, yeah, I'm super excited. This is great. We love this. We'll be in touch. Let's try to talk, maybe tomorrow or the next day and see if we can close in the next week or two. And then they just never email you back, and it's just completely like, yeah. So there's a lot of different pieces in there, but that was some of the stuff that comes to mind.
Yeah, you also mentioned like people asking you about your financial model. Seems like a problem
Oh yeah,
at your stage.
that was definitely a piece. Like we're super new. We have a handful of customers. We like are still figuring out exactly what the product value prop is in some cases and stuff. So it's like a year from now, we could have an entirely different product. It's just like the early stage stuff is just so turbulent. And people were saying, like, as part of the investment diligence, we want to see a financial model. And I was like, okay, I can definitely make up a bunch of BS. Like, I can put together, I know how to make a spreadsheet that says something that looks like what you're asking for. But as well as I do, that's all going to be complete BS. And so, I mean, I would ask this in a slightly nicer way, but I would just be like, that's going to be total BS. Like, why? What are you really looking for? And often they would say, yeah, I mean, we're curious, like, just like, who would you be hiring and when? And that's a totally much more tractable question. We can actually approach that and give you a reasonable answer. So that was one thing. And certainly I tell people who are fundraising. I just had a coffee with a guy a couple days ago, about to start fundraising. And it's like, yeah, I mean, if they want that, it's going to take a lot of time and it's going to have very low value. So basically find out what they're really looking for, because that in particular, the financial model at this stage, there's no way they actually need that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to move a little, and I'm seeing some conversation in the chat about the type of energy projects you're seeing. What are the big trends? We talk about geothermal and I'm sure solar farms. What's the big picture right now?
Geothermal's huge and awesome. The reason that it's really great and really powerful is the fact that it has it's firm power. So what firm means is that it's not, dependent on whether the sun is shining or if the wind is blowing. Um, Solar and wind are susceptible to the weather changing, of course. And that doesn't mean that it's useless. Like, I don't think anybody in this room is considering that. But, some people are like, yeah, I mean, you could never use it because it's unreliable. And that's not true. It's just there's an additional challenge of it being unreliable. So what you need to do there is figure out, okay, if we expect that we'll usually have this much sun, um, but sometimes there'll be a little bit less, let's overpower our solar farm so that we're, creating twice as much power in the best of times, like when it's really sunny. And when the sun is not so powerful, we have this extra surface area to generate more power. That type of thing is an option, but then it's also kind of expensive and doesn't, I mean, that still doesn't work at night and stuff, right? So in order to make solar or wind firm, we need to introduce batteries. And that's great, and we're developing all that. And that's kind of the first like trend I'm thinking, is that batteries are developing really quickly and that space is growing really fast in order to generate more, or in order to enable more firm power sources. But having things like geothermal are also really, really huge. So I mean, that's a big piece. Um, Also touching that, data centers. I mean, everybody knows that AI is exploding and data centers are going off. The challenge there from a climate perspective is that a lot of those data centers are looking at relying on gas power to power them, which is really unfortunate that we're thinking about a substantial growth in gas plants. Um, Better than coal, but not as good as other things. And the main reason there is because it's firm power. They can actually rely on that 100%. And so, I mean, that's a challenge that we're facing. That's something that we need to work on, and we will get there. I'm very confident in our ability to solve that type of problem, but it's going to involve a lot more development of what we call hybrid systems, solar and storage. And then the last thing I want to point out that is super obvious if you're in the space, but really not if you're not, is really just going back to that kind of the coordination problems. The challenge of developing all of this is around municipalities that, one area doesn't want to allow solar anymore because the constituents have started fighting against it because of misinformation, or because just like it's kind of a change to their world and they don't like that change, which, like, I totally understand based on, a lot of the stories that I've heard of kind of how it affects them and kind of what their life situation is. And so being able to deal with like the many, many very powerful stakeholders in all this is really challenging. And that has gotten harder and harder, where now the places that were easily connectable to the grid because we had capacity on the grid, those are kind of used up. The places that either didn't really have permitting and they didn't really care, they didn't worry about it, now they're worried about it, or they are totally fine with it, but now those spaces are taken up. So it's like we're kind of really getting to some like the real challenges are starting to actually pop up. And so it's just getting a lot more complicated in that space as well.
Do you get also to touch nuclear projects, or is it something completely different?
I mean, we haven't looked at that at all. There's not a lot of nuclear projects going on. There's a lot of like
Yeah,
research
so
and
early.
development, but in terms of actual like breaking ground and building that, um, yeah, I would love to be working on that. My dad was a nuclear power engineer, but yeah, not there yet.
I think the market expects a lot of startups to get there with the smaller nuclear plants, and but maybe conversation for another time. I want to get into the product design. So yeah, can you walk us through the design process of the product? And as I teased earlier on, there's a lot of AI involved and AI agents. So maybe for this group, to level the playing field, can you just give us more information about AI agents, how they work, and how you design the product? I think that would be super helpful.
So there's workflows where you're like typically you have a very step-by-step process. You have chat apps where you're like not really in your process, but you went to ChatGPT to do something and then kind of came back. Um, then there's co-pilots where you're doing your workflow. So let's say you're writing code, and then you have something that just kind of tosses stuff in there every so often. So it's like recommending, oh, it looks like you're doing this. Do you want to autocomplete all of this line of code or something? Or maybe you're writing a document and you give it some sort of like a kind of hypothesis or like a thesis statement or something, sorry. And then it like auto generates a paragraph for you. It's not going to be amazing. It's not going to be great. You're not done, but you can edit that and go from there. And so that kind of like co-pilot, like the term co-pilot I'm using as like it helps you get your workflow done, but doesn't like actually do all of it. And then at the very end, there's an AI agent where the agent is basically just imagine that as a coworker that did all the work for you. So they fully automate a whole section of your job, or of the job that needs to get done, and then you take it where from there. There's a little bit more of a spectrum than you might than I just described it, and so Thresh is really trying to figure out where do we fit on that spectrum, where should we fit, and that's also a different thing over time. Like where should we be today versus where should we be in 5 years? Um, Part of that is technically speaking. Like partly we need to think about like, okay, how well can we actually get this done? If we tell people that we 100% are certain we will get these 400 data points and they will always be perfectly correct. If that's true, that's great. Then we're all the way on the AI agent side. If it's not actually true and we can only sometimes get this data or sometimes this is wrong or something like that, then we just let them down substantially. So we don't want to make that promise if we can't. So we are like the way that we're seeing it is let's focus on being as much of an AI agent as possible, but really be like a co-pilot where where we want to have a little bit more of like a human in the loop type of experience. How do we collaborate with that human and get that work done there? So that's all like relatively abstract, but that's a lot of like how we're thinking about it. How we're actually executing on that is really just talking to our customers and working through it with them. Like, what do you expect this to do? What do you expect that this could do? If it spits out this versus this, what would you want to do with that? If we spit this out and then let you double check that information in this way, how would that work well for you? So just really hearing like what do they want it to do and how can we get there? And then also really setting the right vision though for us of like, okay, what are you ultimately trying to do? You're doing all of this diligence work so that you can create this final memo that decides whether you invest in this or not. Like that's what we want to output. Because ideally you just upload the project, it spits out the investment memo and says, yep, you're good. You should buy this for
Mhm.
this reason and this reason at this price. So that's how we've been thinking about the whole development process. There's a bunch of different steps. And so it's a combination of like interpreting data, making decisions, and kind of having like a state machine there, and then following that path, and then having a final output at some point, which is going to be driven often by an LLM at many parts, and certainly at that kind of like more text-based output if that's what you're doing. But it'll also often have like we use optical character recognition because we get some sort of a document in that was like handwritten. And so there's little pieces of that kind of tech there. There's You might have some sort of like a linear regression of some of the math that you're pulling in data X and data Y. Like there's an AI agent is really like the full set of LLMs combined with other pieces of technology to enable a full workflow.
So one thing we're touching on, it seems wonderful, but also complex, and you're going after an industry that's pretty traditional from what I understand. How do you build trust and how do you also help your customer through change? Have you worked out a method?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult. I would describe like our customer as anywhere, like the exact person is anywhere from essentially a construction worker to a finance Wall Street person, you know? And like, especially neither of those two people are the most tech forward for many reasons. And Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely hard, especially when you're talking about like, hey, you're going to make a $20 million acquisition of something. What if you don't read the relevant documents that much? Like that's not something that people want to hear for sure. That sounds like a bad idea. And I totally get that. Ultimately, it really comes down to just trust and building that trust over time. So everyone like the way that we do our sales process is have the first couple of conversations, a demo, et cetera. But then we say, okay, upload a project or yeah, upload the files from a project that you know pretty well. So you know what the issues are and you know what you should be looking for. And then see how Thresh catches that and where that would pop up and what you would expect and what you do or don't see, et cetera. And then from there, it's like, okay, now use this on a live project and like they'll probably be double checking everything, so it'll honestly probably save them a minimal amount of time, and then over time they're going to start double checking the things that they know we're okay at catching and not even needing to double check the things that what they know we're really good at, and that just needs to be built over time, lots of work and yeah, usage.
Yeah, I guess that's, this adoption curve and how the early adopters have to do a bit more efforts, but also get more of your attention as you develop new product. Maybe can you say, how did you find your 10 first customers?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that has been just being annoying, going to conferences, and just talking to everybody I can. Um, uh, I mean, I've gotten introductions from investors who didn't invest in us. I've gotten introductions from my dad from some event that he went to, my college friends that I haven't talked to in like 8 years, like really all over the place. Um, a couple we've gotten out of like cold outreach and stuff like that as well, of course, but a lot of it is very hand-to-hand combat is what I've heard it described as.
So there's an equivalent to the co-founder blurb for the outreach blurb, I assume, or anything you can share from tips for other entrepreneurs in the room of how you get your first customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is just like, uh, I mean, if you've never done sales, I'm happy to talk through that with you. If for anybody who's starting a company and needs to do the sales piece, um, there's a lot of stuff that we don't know as engineers and PMs. We don't know how sales works. And just like learning what you do actually need to do, what that actually looks like, where it is just simply grind it out and just spend hours doing that and just live in the spreadsheet and LinkedIn forever. As opposed to other parts where it's like, no, wait, don't waste your time on all of that. You can use this tool to make that faster, or that part's not even worth your time, et cetera. Um, and then how to make sure that those conversations are useful. Like there's just so much to learn. I'm still learning a hell of a lot of it. I'm absolutely at the beginning. So yeah, honestly, if you're starting a company and that's you, like I'm just here to talk for sure.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome. And I think we also want to share after the call some links from first round review about product market fit and
Yep.
understanding which stage you're into, because some of the techniques, and I see that a lot in marketing, like people trying to copy strategies from bigger companies and they don't really apply when you're early stage. So being able to match the right strategy and tactics with the stage you're in is very important. One thing I wanted to highlight, I was lucky enough to be on your email list and having your monthly recap. I think what you do really, really well is being open and transparent. It feels sometimes very scary, but I hear it brings a lot of return to and trust. So can you say more about this monthly communication you send and who you send it to and how helpful it's been for you?
Yeah, honestly, I started doing it really just to stay in touch with my friends. So I would just kind of like, I told a bunch of people I was going to start a company and they all wanted to hear about it. And I can't just text everybody all the time. And so I was like, all right, let me just start sending out this email. I was also copying one of my friends, to be clear. He's been doing this for several years. But yeah, so I mean, I was sending out that email just saying like, yeah, this is what we worked on. This is what's going on, et cetera. But over time, I've added people that I've met at conferences, people that tried and failed to sell to, investors, like all sorts of different people. And it's been incredibly valuable. I mean, it's internally valuable just to like reflect on what we're doing and see, oh wow, feels like nothing happened this month. But now that I've looked at this, that was a month ago. That feels like 6 years ago. We've done so much stuff in that time. So that stuff is cool. But it's super valuable getting introductions to different people. Let's see, I sent one in November, and this guy that I talked to in March last year, like before we even knew what our product was, I had talked to him. He reached out and he said, "Hey, like we haven't talked in 8 months, but we now have a bunch of acquisitions going on. I'd love to chat." And it's like, that's kind of what marketing is, I guess. I haven't done a lot of marketing. You certainly have, but yeah, I mean, it's that's like the closest thing we have to marketing. So, I mean, it's been super, super helpful for introductions, for internal reflection, but then also literally it is a form of marketing to customers.
What struck me in your communication is how candid it is. Like if you lost a deal, you would mention that and all the learning. And I think it's really accelerating the learning rate of a startup, which is so precious. So just wanted to give you a shout out because I thought that's very brave, probably very impactful, but also probably not easy to do. I know we're almost at time. Maybe just one last word, Mark. What do you wish for this community because you're so involved in it? And so what do you wish for 2025?
I just want people to take the chances that they need in order to really get involved in this stuff. I think a lot of people are held back by how intimidating the highly technical content of different types of climate tech are. Um, I don't think anybody should be held back by what they believe they're capable of. Just like do what you want to, and you'll be way more motivated and way more excited to get into it. And so just getting involved, joining the community, asking questions, joining conversations, talking to anybody they can. And I mean, definitely let me know if I can help with anything. Yeah, just get involved.
Great word of wisdom. Thank you so much, Mark. That was an awesome session. We learned so much. And I'll see everyone back in February for a lot more speakers. So please sign up and see you at the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye.